Charlie! Someone was at the door, knocking loud enough to rattle the old hinges. Charlie rose slowly, her eyes sticky with sleep. But this time, at least, she knew where she was. She had left the window open, and now the air coming in had a fresh, heavy smell. It was the scent of coming rain, mossy and rich. She got up and looked out the window, inhaling deeply. Unlike most of the world, the woods outside looked almost the same in the morning as they had in the dark. Charlie and John had gone back to bed soon after they finished talking. John had looked at her well, like there was more he wanted to say, but she had pretended not to notice. She was grateful for him for being there, for giving her what she needed without having to ask, because she could never have. Charlie! The banging came again, and she gave in. I'm up, Marla, she shouted back. Charlie! Now Jason was joining in the game, knocking and rattling, and Charlie groaned and went to the door. I said I'm up, she said, mock glaring out at them. Charlie! Jason shouted again, and this time Marla shushed him. He grinned up at Charlie, and she laughed and shook her head. Believe me, I'm awake, she said. Marla was fully dressed, her hair a little damp from the shower, and her eyes were bright and alert. Are you always like this? Charlie said, her grumpiness only half invented. Like what? Chipper at 6 in the morning, she said, and rolled her eyes at Jason, who copied her. Happy to be included. Marla smiled brightly. It's 8. Come on. There's been talk at breakfast. Has there been talk of coffee? Charlie followed Marla and Jason down to the stairs to the kitchen, where she found Lamar and Joanna already seated around a high, modern-looking wood table. Carlton's father was at the stove making pancakes. It smells like rain, Charlie said, and Lamar nodded. There's a thunderstorm coming, he said. It was on the news earlier, he told us. He jerked a thumb at Clay. It's a big one, Clay exclaimed in response. We're supposed to leave today, Jason said. We'll see, Marla said. Charlie, Clay cried, not taking his eyes off his work. 1, 2, or 3? 2, Charlie said. Thanks. Is there coffee? Help yourself. Mug's in the cupboard. Clay said, just ran to a full pot on the counter. Charlie, help yourself, waving offers of milk, cream, and half, sugar or fake sugar. Thanks, she said, as she saw herself beside Lamar, meeting John's eyes briefly. Did Carlton come in? Lamar shook his head, a tight jerk to the side. He hasn't turned up yet, Clay said. Probably isn't awake yet, wherever he is. He placed a full plate in front of Charlie, who dug in, not realizing how hungry she was until she was already chewing. She was about to ask where Carlton was likely to be when Jessica appeared, yawning, her clothes unrimpled, unlike Charlie's. You're late, Marla teased, and Jessica stretched elaborately. I don't get out of bed until the pancakes are ready, she said, and with impeccable timing, Clay slapped one onto a plate fresh off the pan. Well, you're just in time, he said. Suddenly his expression changed, wavering somehow between apprehension and relief. Charlie turned her head. There was a woman standing behind her, dressed in a gray skirt suit, her blonde hair shackled against her head as if it were a plastic toy. Are we a Waffle House now? She asked. She looked around the kitchen briefly. Pancakes, Jessica corrected, but no one responded. Betty, Clay cried. You remember the boys, and this is Charlie, Jessica, and Marla, and Jason. He pointed to each in turn, and Carlton's mother gave each of them a nod, like she was telling them up. Clay, I have to be in court in an hour. Betty's the DA for the county. Clay went on as if he had not heard her. I catch the crooks, she puts them back out into the streets. Yes, our family is a full-service operation, she said drearily, pouring herself coffee and settling down at the table beside Jessica. Speaking of which, where's your young felon to be? Clay hesitated. Another one of his pranks, he said. He'll be back home later, I'm sure. Their eyes met, and something private passed between them. Betty broke away with a laugh that sounded a little forced. Oh Lord, what is it this time? There was a moment's pause. In the morning light, the story sounded insane, and Charlie had no idea where to begin. With a nervous clearing of his throat, Lamar started to explain. We went out to the mall constructed site to go see what's left of Freddy Fazbear's. At the name, Betty's head jerked up and she gave a quick nod. Go on, she said, her voice suddenly cold and clipped. Lamar explained, awkwardly, and Marla and Jason jumped in with details. After a few minutes, Carlton's mother had a messy version of the truth. As she listened, her face hardened until it looked like plaster. She was a statue of herself. She shook her head as if they finished small, rapid movements, and Charlie thought she looked like she was not just trying to deny what they were saying, but to shake the knowledge entirely from her mind. We have to go get him, Clay, right now, she demanded. Send someone. You, how could you wait all night? She set her coffee on the table more forcefully than she should have, spilling a little, then went to the phone and started dialing. Who are you calling? Clay said, alarmed. The police, she snapped. I am the police. Then why are you here instead of finding my son? Clay opened and closed his mouth helplessly for a moment before finding his bearings. Betty, it's just another joke. Remember the frogs? She set the phone back onto its hook and turned to face him, her eyes smoldering. Charlie could suddenly see her stating righteous before a jury, wreaking the wrath of the law. Clay, her voice was low and steady, a dangerous calm. How could you not wake me up? How could you not tell me this? Betty, you were asleep. It's just Carlton being Carlton. I didn't want to disturb you. Did you think I would be less disturbed when I woke up and find him missing? I thought he would be back by now, Clay protested. This is different, she said with finality. It's Freddy's. I don't understand Freddy's. I know what happened there. What happened to those kids? He retorted. I don't understand. For goodness sake, Betty, I saw Michael's blood stretch across the floor where he was dragged from. He stopped, realizing too late that he was surrounded by the teenagers. He looked around at them, near panic, but his wife had not noticed, or Charlie thought. She just did not care. Well, you didn't see him, Betty snapped. Do you remember what you told Carlton? Be tough, be brave, be a little soldier? So he was brave. He was a little soldier for you. He was shattered, Clay. He had lost his best friend. He had Marco snatched away right in front of him. Let me tell you something, Chief. That boy was thought about Marco every single day of his life for the past 10 years. I have seen him stage jokes so elaborate they deserve to be mounted as performance art pieces, but there is no way on earth that Carlton would desecrate Michael's memory by making Freddy's a joke. Call someone right now. Clay looked slightly shocked, but he gathered himself quickly and left the room. Charlie heard a door slam shut behind him. Betty looked around at the teenagers, breathing hard as if she had been running. Everything is going to be fine, she said tightly. If he is trapped in there, we will get him out. What do you kids have planned for the day? The question was insane, as if they were all going to hang out at the park or go to a movie while Carlton might be in danger. We were supposed to leave today, Marla said. Obviously, we won't, Lamar said hesitantly, but Betty did not seem to really listen to them. I have to call on to work, she said distractedly, and went to the phone to make the call. Charlie looked at John, who jumped to the rescue. We are going to the library, he said. We have some things we want to investigate, research. He blushed faintly when he said it, and Charlie knew why. It was absurd to be talking like this, but cases and disappearances and murders, but Marla was nodding. Yeah, we'll all go, she said, and Charlie's heart sank. There was no reason she couldn't just let them all that she wanted to go back to her old house, just her and John. No one would be hurt, but that wasn't the problem. Even sharing the knowledge felt too much like exposure. Colton's mother hung up the phone, done with her call. I hate this, she announced to the room in general, her careful, controlled voice almost shaking. I hate this. Charlie and the others jumped in Uzian, startled by the sudden outburst. And now, like always, I get to sit here by myself, hoping and praying that everyone will be okay. Charlie looked at Marla, who shrugged helplessly. Lamar cleared his throat nervously. I think we'll stick around for another day, he said. There was a pause. Then Marla and Jessica jumped in to help. Yeah, traffic is crazy out there, Jessica said, high pitch and force. Yeah, and also because of a storm, it's not like we're going to have fun knowing he's missing, Marla said. I guess you're stuck with us. Jessica flashed an anxious smile at Carlton's mother, who did not seem to register it. Come on, John said before anyone else could speak. He and Charlie hurried out of the house and got into his car. Charlie heaved a sigh of relief as he started the engine. That was awful, she said. Yeah, he gave her a worried look. What do you think about Carlton? Charlie didn't answer until she was safely backed out of the driveway. I think his mom is right, she said, pulling into gear. I think last night we all let ourselves believe we wanted to believe. Officer Dune pulled to a stop in the mall parking lot, responding to Chief Burke's order to return. In the light of day, it was just an abandoned construction site, an ugly blemish of the flat desert landscape. You can't tell from looking if it's being built up or torn down, Dune thought. Can't tell creation from destruction at a distance. He liked the phrase. He turned it over and ahead for a moment, staring at the place. On impulse, he radioed dispatch. Hey, Nora, he said. Dune. She answered crisply. What's going on? Back at the mall for another look, he said. Oh, bring me back a soft pretzel, she teased. He laughed and broke the connection. As he walked briskly through the mall, Dune was at least grateful the children were not there this time. As the youngest member of the Hurricane Police Department, Dune always took care to think of teenagers as children, even though he knew how small the gap between them was. If you could bring him to believe he was a responsible adult, hopefully at some point you could believe it too. Dune flipped on his flashlight as he reached the entrance to the narrow alleyway that led to Freddy Fazbear's. He swept the beam up and down the walls ahead of him, but the alley was empty of life. He took a deep breath and went on. Jonah kept to the wall, his shoulder brushing lightly against the rough brick as he tried to avoid the puddles and the pools beneath leaky pipes. The bright beam of his flashlight illuminated the alley almost as well as overhead bulbs, but somehow the light was not comforting. It only made the place look stark and grim. The shelves of tools and rejected paint cans, now woeful and exposed as he moved toward the door to the restaurant, somehow tiny and cold, landed on his head, and he started swinging his light up like a weapon and pressing his back against the wall as defense against the threat. Another cold drop of water landed on his cheek. He took deep breaths. When at last he reached the outer door to the restaurant, the shelf that had been blocked, it was gone. The chains had seemed to be permanently fixed in place, were hanging loose, and the door was creaked open slightly. The immense rusted padlock lay in the dirt, its shackle hanging open. Dune kicked it away from the door. He dug his fingers into the gap, prying until he could get a grip on it. Then pulled at the door with both hands until it stretched open wide, enough for him to enter. He crept down the inner passage with his light held out in front, hugging the wall tight to one side. The air seemed to change as he moved clear to the interior of the restaurant. and Dune felt a crawling chill that penetrated his uniform and felt his growing anxiety. Don't freak out, Dune, he said aloud, then felt instantly foolish. He reached the main dining area and stopped, switching the light over each wall in turn. The light seemed dimmer inside, swallowed by the space. The room was empty, but it was just as he remembered from when he was a kid. He had been 10 when the tragedy started, 11 when they ended. His birthday party was supposed to be at Freddy's, but after the first disappearance, his mother had canceled it, invited his friends to his house, and hired a clown, which proved equally terrifying. Smart move, Mom, Dune thought. The beam played over a little carousel, which he had never ridden, claiming he was too old for it. Just before the beam of light reached the stage, Dune stopped, swallowing hard. The rabbit took him. The kid said. Don took himself and played the light across the stage. The figures were there. There's just he remembered, and unlike the carousel, they did not seem diminished in size. They were exactly as he recalled, and for a moment, an almost painful nostalgia swelled in his chest as he gazed at them. Remembering, he noticed that their eyes were all fixed, all the way forward, like they were watching something in the far side of the room. The flashlight trained in front of him. Dune approached the stage until he was standing only a feet away from it, and he stared up at each of the animals in turn. Bonnie was holding his guitar gently as if he might begin strumming whenever the mood struck him, and Chica and her cupcake seemed to be stirring some arcane secret. Freddy, with his microphone, stared into the distance, unblinking. Something moved behind him, and John rolled around, his heart racing. The flashlight found nothing, and he swept and nervous from side to side, revealing only empty tables. He glanced back nervously at Bonnie, but the rabbit was still frozen in his own indestructible reverie. Dune took shallow breaths, holding himself completely still and listened. His senses kicked into high gear with adrenaline. After a moment, the noise came again, a shuffling around, this time coming from off to the right. He swept the light instantly toward it. There was an open doorway, and beyond it, a hall. Crouching down, Doom made his way down the hall, keeping to the side as though something might come running past. Why am I here alone? He knew the answer. His sergeant hadn't taken the search seriously. In truth, neither had Dune. After all, it was just the chief's son again, making trouble. It's probably just Carlton, Dune reminded himself. He reached down the hall, where a door stood ajar. With one hand, Dune gave the door an inward push, dropping low and to the side as he did. The door swung inward and nothing happened. He pulled the nightstick from his belt. Its heft was unfamiliar. He had never had much needed for a hurricane. Now, though, he gripped it harder rubber like a lifeline. The office was not quite empty. There was a small desk and a folded metal chair leaning against it. A large cabinet stood against one wall. Its door just creaked. There were no exits other than one Jim was standing in. He swept the light up and down the length of the cabinet and took a deep breath. He glanced his nightstick highly in his hand, reassuring himself of its presence, and carefully assessed the small space. Standing to the side, he used his stick to open the door, moving slowly. It came easily open, and again everything was still. Relieved, Dune to look inside. The cabinet was empty except for a costume. It was Bunny, or rather, it wasn't. The face was the same, but the rabbit's fur was yellow. It was slumped lifelessly against the back wall of the cabinet, its eyes dark, gaping holes. The rabbit took him. The kid had been lying. Then Carlton must have gotten someone to dress up in his outfit to help him play his trick. Still, Dawn's unease did not debate. He did not want to touch the thing. He lowered his light and stuck his nightstick back to his belt, intending to go. But before he could turn, the costume pitched forward, landing on Jim with the lifeless weight of a heavy corpse. For a moment, it did not move. Then, all at once, it was breathing violently, grabbing at him with strong, inhuman hands. John screamed, a desperate high sound struggling as the rabbit grabbed his shirt, then his arm. John felt a sudden and vicious pain, and a small, detached part of his mind thought, he broke it, he broke my arm. But the pain was washed, numbed by terror as the rabbit swung him around and slammed him into the cabinet door, taking John's weight easily as if he were a child. John struggled to breathe. The rabbit's armor was pressed against his neck so tightly that every movement choked him. Just when he thought he was in the brink of passing out, the pressure lifted, and John gasped in relief, clutching his throat. Then he saw the knife. The rabbit held a slim silver blade. Its big, mammoth paws should have been too clumsy, but Duna knew as he stared down at it the rabbit had done this before and would easily do it again. John screamed, an indistinct shriek. He had no hope that he would be heard. It was only a territorial, despairing noise. He breathed deep and did it again. A bestial sound. His whole body vibrated with it, as if this could somehow be defense against what happened next. The knife went in. Donna felt it tear through his skin and muscle, felt it severed things he could not name to plant himself deep into his chest. As he seized with pain and terror, the rabbit pulled him close, almost in an embrace. John's head went light. He was losing consciousness. As he looked up, he could see 2 rows of smiling teeth, horrid and yellow. The costume peeling at the edges of the mouth, the 2 gaping holes for eyes looking down at him. They were dark, hollow, but the creature drew near enough that John could see smaller eyes peering back at him from deep within the mask. They held John's gaze patiently. Don felt his legs go numb, his vision clouding. He wanted to scream again to somehow his voice outraged, but he could not move his face, could not raise the breath to cry out. The rabbit held up upright, supporting his weight, and his eyes were the last thing Don ever saw. Charlie unlocked the front door to her old house and looked back down the front steps. You coming? John was still sitting in the bottom step, staring up at the house. He shivered a little before hurrying to join her. Sorry, he said sheepishly. I had a weird feeling for a second. Charlie laughed without much humor. Just for a second. They went inside and John stepped again, looking around the front room like he had just stepped into a sacred place, somewhere that merited a humbling pause. Charlie bit her tongue, trying not to be impatient. It was how she had felt as well. She might have felt that way as if she were not overwhelmed by a sense of urgency. The feeling that the answer to everything, the answer to how to get Carlton back, must be somewhere in this place. Where else could it be? John, she said, it's okay, come on. He nodded and followed her up to the stairs to the second floor. He stopped again briefly halfway, and Charlie saw his eyes fixed in the dark satin that marred the wood floor of the living room. It is, he began to say, then swallowed it and started over. Is Stanley still here? Charlie pretended to not notice the last. You remember his name, she said, instead of greeting. John shrugged. Who doesn't have a mechanical unicorn? Yeah, he's still here. All the toys still work. Come on. They hurried the rest of the way to her room. John knelt up beside the unicorn and pressed the button that sat on his truck, watching rapidly as he made his squeaky way around the room. Charlie had a smile behind her hand. John was watching intently, his face serious as though something was important were happening. For a moment, he looked just like he had so many years ago, his hair falling into his face. His whole attention fixed on stealing like nothing in the world was more important than this robotic creature.